a guy with 100,000 followers who gets a lot of impressions on Twitter starts talking about your product and then you go in a different direction. You're still trying to experiment. You're still trying to find it out. And it can actually cause more harm than good.
Hi everyone, you're listening to Scaling DevTools. This is an interesting episode because we have two guests. We have Stefan from WonderGraph and we have Dan from FusionAuth. And today we're going to be talking about DevRel and the role of DevRel at startups. Stefan is the founder of WonderGraph and Dan is head of DevRel at FusionAuth. So Stefan, thanks for joining. Could you give us a bit of an intro to WonderGraph?
Of course, and thanks for having me. So my name is Stefan. I'm the co-founder and head of growth at WonderGraph. We're an open source GraphQL Federation solution. And I have some interesting opinions on DevRel. First, just to clarify, I do love DevRels. I have a lot of friends in the developer relations field, but I have some opinions about how it's done and how bigger companies do it. So when Jack told me about this podcast and who I'd be talking to, I was like, yeah, let's get into it. So Jack, thanks for having me.
Thanks for coming. And Dan, thanks for coming back. Could you tell us a bit about FusionAuth?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks again for having me. I am head of DevRel at FusionAuth, and FusionAuth is an identity server solution. So lots of people have heard of Auth0, maybe familiar with Cognito. We play in that same space. And I think I saw Stefan's tweet that I think you amplify, Jack. And so I was like, wait a second. And I ended up writing a little blog post about why I think he's wrong. Even though I'm sure we'll have a cordial discussion about DevRel, because a lot of my friends are in growth marketing too.
At some point, you're going to land a big customer and they're going to ask you for enterprise features. That's where WorkOS comes in because they give you these features out the box. Features like skim provisioning, SAML authentication, and audit logs. They have an easy-to-use API, and they're trusted by big dev tools like Vercel, as well as smaller, fast-growing dev tools like Knock. So if you're looking to cross the enterprise chasm and make yourself enterprise-ready, check out WorkOS. We've also done an episode with Michael, the founder of WorkOS, where he shares a lot of tips around crossing the enterprise chasm, landing your first enterprise deals, and making sure that you're ready for them. Thanks, WorkOS, for sponsoring the podcast, and back to the show. Awesome. So, Stefan, do you want to introduce us to the tweet that you and what you said in the tweet?
So I actually tweet a lot, so I was wondering if you could. do you remember what it was? I remember a little. Oh, yes, I do. It was.
I have it on my blog post actually, because I think I said if they take it down, so I quoted it. I can drop it in the links if we want.
But I think it was something that you shouldn't have DevRels. Your early customer should be your developer relations, right? Something like.
Yeah, I think that was it. I think actually.
So wait, Stefan, you have so many spicy takes that like you can't remember which ones. Get you introduced to podcasts?
Kinda, because spicy takes, like, it works on Twitter. Like, I'll tweet about something that's actually beneficial and I'll be like, hey, check this out. And then people are like, nah, I don't care. But then you tweet something spicy and you get like 5,000 views on this. So for the podcast listeners, my spicy take was you shouldn't have DevRels. Your customers should be your DevRels. And so I would love to hear your view on that. Dan, I know you wrote a blog post about it, but you can kind of go into it like what you said, and then we'll go into my opinion.
Yeah, sure. So, first of all, I think we needed to determine what we mean when we say what size of company we're talking about, right? Because, obviously a 2-person startup is different than a 100,000 person company, but let's just say kind of VC-backed startups, right? Like might be a good kind of thing to constrain our space. And I think it's absolutely important for every software startup, frankly, every company to have their customers be advocates. I think that's spot on. It's great. There's way more credibility when a customer says, hey, WonderGraph solved my problem, right? Than if someone who's paid by WonderGraph says, hey, WonderGraph will solve your problem. I don't disagree with that. The issue I have is that customers are busy, and they should be because they're probably using your tool to solve other problems, right? To solve their problems. So it's awesome if you can get a customer to write a blog post or a testimonial or contribute some open source code. But I think that you're going to, if you rely on your customers to do all of the things that a properly functioning DevRel department would do, you're going to be unpleasantly surprised because they're not going to do some of the grind and the grunt work that needs to happen to make a dev tool company successful. right? And that would be things like really detailed documentation. Diataxis, it has a great like example of like the 4 kinds of it, right? There's reference, there's tutorials, there's how-tos, and then there's, I don't remember what the 4th one is, but you can't necessarily expect your customer to do that much documentation. Maintaining open source libraries, they're complementary to your product, is something that I wouldn't expect customers to want to do, right? They're going to file tickets and maybe they'll solve the bugs that are really painful to them, but they won't necessarily, build towards a cohesive vision or, do long-term large scale feature requests. I'm trying to think of what other things. And then the last one is, your customer may be sharing, well, I'm sure there's more things, but like the last one I'm going to mention, cause I do want you to talk, Stefan, is your customers may be referring people to other, to your product, but it's probably pretty unlikely that they're flying their devs out to speak at conferences or meetups or, promoting your tool on their social networks, right? Because, so that awareness piece is something that, again, like a properly structured DevRel program can help.
Yeah, no, well said. And of course, it's Twitter. So I think I should have clarified, and I'll give a little bit of background about WonderGraph and us. So the tweet was, you shouldn't have DevRels. Your customer should be your DevRels. I should have probably prefaced this saying, in early stage startups like myself and others, you shouldn't have DevRels. Your customer should be your DevRels. And I think we're going to agree a lot more because, early on, I think it's imperative that people know about your product and they try it on. And a little background about WonderGraph. So we're about 14 people. Every single person is a developer. I am actually not even considered a developer anymore because of all the sales and marketing things I do on the Grow. I 100% agree with what you said. I think when you're a large organization and you have a lot of people, who's going to write the documentation? 14 people, we can do it. Our customers help out since it's open source. You're right. Our whole offering is open source. So we have to maintain that. And we do that now. But as we continue to scale, it's going to be a little bit difficult. And right now, every single founder is focused on educating. We build something or we're building something, we tweet about it or we talk to a customer. And so currently what we're doing, and I think, Dan, you're totally right, is your customers are busy. And the thing is, some customers can't even talk about your product because they're in, the government space, or they have a strict NDA, or, they just don't want to show their face on camera. And I totally agree with you that later on a DevRel will become handy for that. But I think early on, and the biggest problem that we had was, like, I think Jack said this and like we were just talking about this, or I think you did, was sure that a guy with a lot of followers, he might not be a good DevRel just because he has a lot of followers. And I totally agree with you because when we were hiring early on, the first hire we actually wanted to make was a DevRel. And we raised $3 million in funding, which is a good seed round, but you need to stay conservative, especially with everything that happened in 2023. And people were coming to us asking for a salary of like $290,000 for a DevRel. And he's like, but look, I have 100,000 followers. I can tweet about this. And what I saw was we became the DevRel team and we decided that customers would become the DevRel. But then we saw another company that raised a very similar amount to us. Same thing. They had a lot of followers. And if you look at who's more ahead because the founders were a little bit more focused and not, I think early on, it's really imperative that you don't hire that DevRel. And there's an interesting point. I actually do want to talk about the conferences. I think, and I would love to get your opinion on this. So when we went to GraphQL Conf, there was a lot of big competitors. I'm talking like companies with hundreds of millions of funding, and they just had a lot of money, and they sent these DevRel peoples. I showed up. I baked pretzels that looked like GraphQL logos. I wore an orange suit. I made myself a clown to get as much attention possible. And when I looked at these large companies that did send these DevRels, they were just sitting there. They're on vacation. They're in San Francisco. They don't really care. But when you send a founder, he's wearing a freaking spacesuit and dragging people to his booth. And so that's where it gets tricky for me because I told my founder, I was like, when we get this big, I don't want to hire anyone else to go because they won't have the same passion as I'm having. Like, look at me. I'm in a monkey suit. I'm 26 in a monkey suit, like at a conference. My mom texted me. She's like, are you sure you're at work? What are you doing here? But I would love to dive a little bit more into that because that's where I think it gets tricky because when you get big with any company, like, are the DevRels doing what they should be doing? Are they educating? Are they doing the things that you said? Because if they are doing the things that you said, then that's a perfect DevRel team.
Right. So many things to dig in, but like one thing I think that we're 100% agreement on, which I think I would twist or paraphrase your tweet a little bit, is you said the founders should be DevRels. That's what I heard you say. And I absolutely think just like your founders should be salespeople, your founders should be customer support. Like at those early stage companies, I would say under 10, because I co-founded a different startup, not FusionAuth, but something else where I was the technical co-founder and I was on customer support calls. I was doing product. I was doing like QA. I was doing kind of the whole shebang. And no one is going to have the passion to help take something from 0 to 1 like a founder will. Right. And, I 100% agree that for a company that is hired, that has raised a couple $1 million, which I agree sounds like a lot of money, but doesn't go as far as it used to. Hiring anybody making $290K a year or $250K a year would be, I don't care if they invented GraphQL. Like that probably is not the right fit, right? Because the company's too early, and we've all heard stories, or I've heard stories of people who are succeeding wildly at FAANG, right? And then they come into a startup and they don't have the infrastructure around them. They don't have the process. They don't have the resources, and they have a hard time. They fail. So I think some of it is just startup nature, right? The other thing a couple of things I want to say is there's a great video that I was listening to yesterday he used to be like head of DevRel at New Relic. His name is Jonan. I'll dig it up and you can put it in the show notes, but he talks about like the 2 different kinds of DevRel hires you can do. And the first is that, really big name with 100,000 followers, etc. The second is someone who's scrappier and hungrier. And I think the perfect DevRel hire for a startup is a software engineer who is interested in making that shift, maybe not being on call, maybe not, learning more about marketing and sales. And I think someone who wants to be kind of a utility player, again, 14 people in a company, you can't have someone who's not a utility player, right? Like everyone's got to be pulling along, until you get bigger and then you can start to specialize. So a lot of agreement there. I will say at bigger companies, I think I will say, Stefan, that like I have run into this before. And the honest truth is no one cares about your baby like you do. And I guarantee you when WonderGraph gets to 100 people, you'll start to want people that fill specific roles that aren't going to be full of passion and willing to wear a suit and bake pretzel, right? Like, I don't even know how you could assemble a team of 100 founders, right? Like maybe you can, and maybe people have done it, but that to me is, you need to just start having structure. And that means that some people are going to care less, unfortunately. That doesn't mean they can't do a good job. It just means that they're not going to care, like probably because they don't own double-digit percentage of the company like you do too, right? Like there's a lot of aspects to that. To kind of bring it back, I think that for early stage companies, the founders should be in developer relations. And obviously if customers can help out and provide additional content or additional social proof, that's fantastic. I'll pass it back to you to agree or disagree with that statement.
Yeah. I think you kind of explained it very well, especially like with the conference part. Like that does make sense. I mean, I can only dream that it will, that everybody will care as much as we do. And like, I have seen some companies where, they work for them and it's like kind of like a cult love that they love for the company. And that's exactly the type of company that I want to build, is that people go to conference and they wear, our logo as a badge of honor because we're creating some cool stuff in the GraphQL space. But I mean, Jack, should we just end the podcast? I guess we agree on everything.
I have a question. So this is something that I think a lot of people have talked about. Why is it not the right thing to hire that person with 100,000 Twitter followers?
So from our perspective, what we've seen is, I see it, especially early on, and this comes from an early on point of view, is, you're still trying to find product market fit. You're still experimenting with what your product actually does. And it can actually cause more harm than good if a guy with 100,000 followers who gets a lot of impressions on Twitter starts talking about your product and then you go in a different direction. And it kind of shows untrust. Wait, I thought they were doing this SDK. It's open source. Now they're not. Now they're doing this. Now they're doing that. And it just kind of creates a little bit of untrust. And the more followers he has, it could actually hurt your product because you're still trying to experiment. You're still trying to find it out. And if he's creating content on something that maybe isn't going to be what Wondergraph is in the future, or it's not going towards a large roadmap, then I actually see it as more harmful than good.
Yeah, I think that's a really a great subtle point. I think you could even make it kind of bigger and say like, you might not be able to handle the people who come in who, even if your product stays kind of exactly the way that this person was saying, there might be bugs in the product or flaws in the funnel or something like that. And so I think of by hiring someone with 100,000 followers, it's kind of like the equivalent of buying an ad at the Super Bowl, right? Or whatever the UK equivalent is. I don't know, but something that's going to be huge. It might bring in a ton of traffic.
We know about the Super Bowl.
But you won't be able to appropriately handle it. The other thing I'd say is, and I don't think this is true of everybody that you hire who has a big following, but like they are, this is not their first rodeo. And so they're not going to have the same level of buy-in. I think that I still don't have a huge name, right? In the internet, but like I have a larger name than I did when I started at FusionAuth. And a lot of it is associated with FusionAuth. And I have a lot of loyalty to FusionAuth for taking a chance on me as a fairly new DevRel. And so I think, that is true of other, if you hire somebody who is interested in the space of DevRel, but not a big name, they're going to have more loyalty to you as a company than someone that has a lot of other alternatives and kind of picks you one among, many people they'd be happy to have.
You hit a really interesting point about like the followers and like who's following them. And I actually have seen this happen. So that company that hired that DevRel, they hired two really big DevRels. One had like 60,000 followers, and one had like around 10. And both DevRels have actually left. And it's because they obviously are not they haven't found the PMF, they've shifted it, things like that. And this is where it gets weird for me. And I always fight with Dax about this because like the more followers you have, obviously it's a little bit easier that there might be your ICP in those followers, the people that your product can actually help and your DevRel can educate. And so what I noticed was that these two DevRels were working in GraphQL and they completely went to a different industry. Now somebody's in databases, but not graph databases or anything with databases, just databases. And so he went from GraphQL and hardcore GraphQL to databases. And then another one was also with GraphQL. And now she's doing something, I forgot what it was. I think it's an ORM. And so for me also, I think it's tricky. Like, who is this person's actual audience? Like, I would rather hire a DevRel in the DevRel space of GraphQL that has 2,000 followers, but these are big enterprises that look at this guy's opinion and they're like, wow, this is fantastic, versus a guy that has 50,000 followers, but I don't know who they are. Are they a bunch of junior developers? Are they decision makers? Who are they?
Are they people who went to his comedy show one time, right? Like, you just don't know who's behind the followers. I will say as a DevRel, that is, there is some portability, right? Because there are devs and devs talk to devs, but, I don't think, and this gets back to something we talked about before hopping on the call, like a lot of, early stage companies, I think less now. I think the shine is off the rose a little bit, but a couple of years ago, people were like, if you're a dev tools company, you hire DevRel and suddenly all the other problems go away, right? Like it's like magic fairy dust. And, I just don't think that's true, right? Like DevRel is one other function and I think it's critical. And the reason why I think it's critical, and there's no such thing as like accounting rel or other things rel. I think I haven't actually run across anybody, right? Like when I did that startup, we were in the food space and we didn't have like food ambassadors or anything like that. The reason why I think DevRel is kind of different, developers relations is a little bit different, is because the developers have kind of a couple of unique attributes. One is they are allergic to marketing. We've all heard people say that. They are used to getting things for free. The product choice, the process is a lot more involved for dev tools and at the same time, a lot stickier, right? Which is why I think people are interested in building dev tools, because if you use FusionAuth or use WonderGraph and it's valuable to you, you'll talk to people about it. It'll get embedded into your product and it will be, hopefully it's a win for customers, but it will definitely be helpful to the company to be sticky along that, the products they're integrated with for a long time. And so, that all is to say that like, it's important to talk to devs and have them be part of the audience that your company is addressing, but it's not, just because you will talk to somebody and maybe you have a megaphone and 100,000 followers or 10,000 followers and you can talk to a lot of people. That doesn't mean that it's going to be right for everybody, as you kind of said, Stefan, but it also doesn't mean that your product is actually going to be right for them. Right. And so, or ready for them. So I just want everyone listening to this podcast to kind of be aware that like, just like hiring an awesome salesperson isn't magic fairy dust for your startup. Hiring an awesome DevRel is not going to be magic fairy dust for your startup. Like it's all these pieces have to work together, which is why, by the way, shocker, startups are hard.
I totally agree with that. And I have one question, because like when I was saying my answer, like I said like ICP or they'll be in there. And so obviously I've been more on the sales front, and then yours was more education. So my question for you, Dan, you have the experiences and we can dive into this. Where is DevRel? Is it in marketing or is it in sales? Because the way I see it and the things that I've seen, and I'll tell some stories, is I see it in sales.
Yeah. So I honestly think that, it can totally vary. I've seen it in product. I've seen it in marketing. I've seen it in sales. I've seen it in the report directly to the CEO. That's the situation at FusionAuth currently. I think that honestly, if you're a small DevTools company, it should report to the CEO. Now you have a 10,000 person company or even 200. I don't know how that works. I think that you need to depend, but I think DevRel inherently, especially at early stage startups, should be cross-functional. And that means that like kind of having them report to marketing or having them report to sales is really, going to short circuit some of the benefits that a company will get. Because honestly, I view my role at FusionAuth as head of DevRel to be the voice of the community, which is people who are not paying us, but they're people who are, well, let me rephrase that. They're not paying us in dollars. They're paying us in attention. They're paying us in mind share. They're paying us in bug fixes. They're paying us in suggestions. Now you can't pay a mortgage with suggestions, but you can, it can vastly improve your product and vastly improve your chances of success. But I've helped out with sales calls. I've helped out with marketing. I've helped out with customer support. I don't know. Am I sidestepping your question, Stefan? Because it was a good question.
No, I think you kind of, yeah, like for me, like what I've seen in my experience, and I think what you just said is, I agree with. It should be cross-functional. And what I don't like is when DevRels are like, oh, it's not sales. Like my job is to educate. And I was like, yes, it's to educate a potential user to transition into a potential buyer and to solve their problem for their organization or for themselves and eventually give you money. Because you're right. You can't pay a mortgage with PR contributions or, GitHub stars. Eventually somebody needs to put a credit card down and pay. And what I've seen with other DevRels is, like my friends will say that my goal is to educate. And I was like, yes, that's your goal. And you report to this person, but he reports to this person who needs to tell him, hey, this is how many impressions we made. The blog post brought this many visitors. This many went through this funnel. And like, this is what we see when we do our own, advocate. And it's like, at the end of the day, like, and correct me if I'm wrong, like your job is to educate people to be successful with your product. And another one we'll dive deep into is what I've seen with some large companies, which I don't like. And I can easily differentiate between a good DevRel and a bad DevRel, because a good DevRel, he doesn't just push his product. He says, well, it could be good for this use case. It could be for that use case. And a specific example, I saw a DevRel from a very large web hosting company, and they were asking like, can you use this with Vite? And they were like, no, it's totally not possible. You need to use Turbo Repo. And obviously a very large company owns Turbo Repo, but then somebody on a comment on there like, you absolutely can. Why would you say that? And so that's kind of where I see it in more, that example reframes the question, which was, that's why I thought DevRel goes into sales, because if it was really about education, he would have told him, you can use Vite, you can use Turbo. Here's the benefits and here's the cons of both. You'd go with whatever you would like.
Yeah. I mean, I think that hits on the tension. And I think frankly, there's actually a tension in a lot of, roles in the company but I think DevRel more than most. But the tension I see is you need to maintain authenticity with, or integrity with developers, right? Like if all I did was rep FusionAuth all the time for every solution, for every problem, FusionAuth will solve your GraphQL problems, right? Like I'd have zero credibility, right? So you need to maintain that credibility. And at the same time, you need to recognize that someone's paying your salary, and that is at the end of the day due to them, the company being able to make sales. So I do not think if you like black and white, you should get in a DevRel, right? Like black and white decisions, because there's that constant thing. But to answer your proximate question, I would say I absolutely have recommended other solutions to people for auth problems when they talk to me at FusionAuth. And that is my own kind of personal line. I will, talk about the problem, learn about someone's problem, and make a decision whether or not FusionAuth is a fit. An example that I think I mentioned on the interview with you, Jack, is, someone has a really tight tie into the AWS ecosystem, and they don't need certain features and they're willing to put in some effort. I think Cognito is a great fit for an authentication solution. I think a nice way to play this as a DevRel is to say, hey, whatever you do, you probably shouldn't be doing this. You probably should be using some kind of tool, right? Like whether you're using WonderGraph for GraphQL or competitor A, B, or C, what we do is kind of delicate enough or important enough that you should outsource it. And we think you should take a look at our stuff, but like, obviously there are other people in the market. And I think that is a way to, kind of thread that needle, right? Because you're still propositioning somebody. Well, proposition is the wrong word. You're still telling someone like buying is probably the better answer. Because to be honest with you, I've been a developer for a long time. Most of the time, using open source library or buying something is a better answer, unless it's really core to your product. But you're also kind of acknowledging that like your solution has its warts and has its strengths, right? And the other thing I want to say is I 100% agree with you. A good DevRel should raise the product up, raise the product that's paying your salary, right? And be like, hey, yeah, this is a possible solution. I think it could work, but in your example, like they absolutely should have said, oh yeah, that works with Vita, I think you said. I'm not as familiar with that space, but like, again, to preserve that credibility. Otherwise, you're just a highly paid public sales engineer. And, I love the sales engineers at our company, right? I think they're great people. They're incentivized differently as they should be. And their job, I think, is to be the technical person who says, yes, our product will absolutely 100% work for you. And that's fine because that's what their job is. But like, you will short circuit your credibility and actually become less of an effective DevRel if your answer is always FusionAuth, WonderGraph. Like it just is not a good idea.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And there was one, like for me, and I see this like a lot, like for example, and like, it's not like pyramid scheming, but like, I'll just give you an example. Let's say your friend comes to you and he's like, hey, Stefan, like I've been taking these vitamins, AG1, they're fantastic. Try them out. So I go and I try them for a subscription, which I actually did, by the way. That's why I got this example. And then I later found out that my friend is actually an ambassador that gets money each person he brings on. And so like, but he actually likes the product. And for me with software, what can be a little bit tricky is I don't know if they're actually using the vitamins or if they're actually using the product. And so when somebody recommends me something, but they're paid also by that company, and this doesn't also have to be DevRels. This could be tech influencers that are like tweeting like, you need to host on Vercel. And then you find out Vercel is paying them money as I think as a sponsor. For me, that bothers me a lot because it's like, you're incentive, I don't know what the word is, but you know what I'm trying to say, to get people to try out the product. And like, for me also with my own friend, I was a little bit turned away because I was like, wait, but like, would you have told me about the product if you weren't getting paid? And so that's where also it gets tricky with DevRels, because like, would you even be talking about, like WonderGraph or FusionAuth if you didn't work for FusionAuth or for WonderGraph?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I can guarantee you I wouldn't be talking as much about them, right? You have to kind of weigh the integrity, because so let's take those two things apart, right? Because like your friend, I think that the solution to your friend's issue, which I would honestly, if I was in your situation, I'd feel a little bit betrayed too. I'd be like, wait a second, like, how could I trust your opinion really? And I think the answer there is disclosure, right? To be like, hey, I take these all the time. I'm also going to get 10% if you sign up for this, right? And please take that with a grain of salt. But I do recommend this to my mom, right? Or whatever, right? Like, and I think that that is a way for you to make a choice with your eyes open. Because I think part of the betrayal you felt, maybe betrayal is a strong term, part of the sting was that it was secret, right? Like if he'd said like, yeah, I believe in this so much, I'm, repping this to people and getting money for it. That's actually in some ways a different kind of like strong endorsement, right? Because, but DevRel, I think that good DevRels believe in the product, that they can, they believe the company that they're repping is good. They believe that they're willing to put their public reputation to some extent behind the company, even if they can quit their job and then move on to some other company. Like they're still associated with that company. So I guess maybe a question back to you, Stefan, like if you left WonderGraph, right? 5 years down the road, things have changed and your life has changed and you're like, this chapter of my life is over. Will you rep WonderGraph as much as you're doing now? And I would be astonished if the answer was yes, but I'd be interested in hearing.
Yeah, great question. So let's say, like I leave WonderGraph and I'm not there. 5 years down the road, someone asks me about GraphQL Federation or something like that. And, I haven't taken a look at what the current, market is or whatever. I would absolutely recommend WonderGraph. But like, let's say, there's a different solution and it's better. I would still say, hey, I repped WonderGraph, but there's also this solution. Check them out. And, for me, I think what you said is important, the disclosure. And it's like, I don't see enough of that on Twitter. Like they'll be recommending solutions and then you find out on Reddit or something that they're actually sponsors of them. And for me, like, I'm not upset that you're getting paid. I'm actually happy. Like that's fantastic. A company is paying you money to talk about them, but you should at least disclose it, which I think is the key problem, that a lot of companies don't disclose that they're actually getting paid behind, under the table, we'll say, from this company to talk about them. And it's like, I'm not upset that you're getting paid. If you just told me about that, I could have taken that into my, cognitive analysis when I'm deciding a vendor. And I've been like, okay, well, Dan told me about FusionAuth, but also Dan works for FusionAuth. But, I trust his opinion. He actually told me that, he works for them. Let's give them a try. And then I find out and they actually solved my problem. Then I'm okay with it. But versus is like, you recommend FusionAuth like crazy. I go and I try it out. And then I find out on LinkedIn that you actually work for FusionAuth. I'd be like, wait, does he even know what my problem is? But, I think I went a little bit further from that.
Yeah, no, so I'm pretty active on Hacker News, and lots of times I'll be adding comments about, I don't know, other things, right? Like interesting technologies or whatnot. But whenever I comment on an identity related thing, I'm almost, I should be 100% about this. I'd probably say I'm like 98%. I lead with, hey, I work for a competitor or I work for FusionAuth and it's in my profile. And I believe this very strongly. And again, this gets back to, this is an interesting thing. Like there's this question of social capital, and we all know social capital is valuable, but you can either try to maintain it or you can mine it. And there's, MLMs are an example of something, multi-level marketing, right? I don't even know the names of some of them because I'm not really in that world, but they're out there. And that's a situation where you're basically mining your social capital to exchange for personal capital or financial capital. Now, everyone's financial situation is different. If that's the way that you can like put food on your table for your kids or for yourself, then I'm not going to say don't do it, but you have to realize that there's a cost. And what those people are doing when they're repping stuff on Twitter without disclosing things, they are mining their social capital. And that, I think, has short-term benefits and long-term costs.
I would agree on that. And one thing though, when you said like, would you rep WonderGraph? I did forget to tell you like the story. So I actually tried it out when I came across it on accident. And before I became a co-founder, I was like, oh, this is a fantastic solution. And so that was like me advocating for it, but without being tied to it. And I think like that to me is like, you know, when like, for example, it's kind of dorky, but like I tell all my friends to use Superhuman. I'm like, this made email fun and like, it's so fun and I like using it and things like that. And when your product does that without any ties to it, like I have no ties to Superhuman. I just think it's a fantastic product and it actually makes me excited. And when I look at how they built it and they added AI, like I think that to me is the best DevRel you can find because word of mouth is so powerful. And if there's no bias to it, especially early on, like when we have a customer case study we just released and like, I felt like almost like tears coming to my eyes because like, dang, like, you know, we built this and this guy's talking so passionately about it. And like, he has no ties other than he's paying us. Like but he's paying us. Like we're not paying him. That to me, it was like, okay, maybe you don't need a DevRel very early on.
And actually, this is pointing out something really, two interesting points. The first is, I think that we should all strive to build products that are so awesome that people are like, they stop people on the street and say, hey, you know, I want you to use this product because it's going to make your life better, right? Like that's a good thing to strive to do. Sometimes in some places, in some spaces, it's easier than others, right? Like email is something that is painful for everybody and is, you know, everyone can benefit from better email. GraphQL servers or auth servers are maybe a slightly smaller market. But the other thing is that I think when you think about DevRel, especially as an early stage, because as early stage startup, you're so interested in people like just try us, just find out about us. Our biggest competitor is no one knows about us. But there's like top of funnel activities, where it's like an awareness thing. And then there's like lower down fun where people are like know about you, but they're trying you out. And I think that's where early stage DevRel can add a ton of value, right? Because if people, back to the 100,000 Twitter follower example, if people find out about you, but you don't have any documentation and they're reading through, they're going through the WonderGraph source code to try to figure out how to do this thing, they're gonna, that's friction. That's sand in the wheels, where they won't be as successful as you want them to be. So, lots of people think about DevRel. They think about those dev advocates speaking on the stage or, you know, tweeting or whatever other kind of social media action they can take. But there's a ton of DevRel focused activities that are further down the developer journey where people can, you know, succeed or fail or churn or bail because they can't find the answer they're looking for, or the developer experiences of sign up is horrible, or the developer experience of using it is horrible.
So great point.
Sorry.
Oh, Jack, just real quick. I wanted to make this funny joke, which was, like you said, like the documentation and they get stuck. And like, I always used to joke, like, I don't need to document my code because it documents itself. Like it's so good, you know, you don't have to, which is obviously not true of any software products. Like good docs, they're a dime a dozen. They're very hard to find, and good code is even harder to find. Go ahead, Jack.
No, sorry. I was going to say, I think we're coming up to time. This has been really fun for me to just sit back and listen. I wanted to ask you both for some kind of like closing thoughts on like DevRel strategies that you would, you know, in a nutshell, what you would advise to most like DevTools founders if at the early stage.
Do you want to go first or should I?
Just real quick, how far is Fusion off? Like, are they also early stage or are they bigger?
We're about 30 people right now. I joined when we were 5.
Okay.
A couple of years ago. But it's kind of a unique story because of a different product they had. You have to listen to the episode, but I'd say it's weird because we're not like a traditional like series A, B, or C kind of, VC backed company. So
this is going to be super good for the listeners because like we're very early stage and like we went away from the DevRels, and then you guys as employee number 5, you grew with us. So from like our end, like with Head of Growth, what we focus extensively on are really detailed blog posts. Our founders write them, we write them, and we talk very specific about the things that we're building. And what we also do is we take what our customers are building and we talk to other customers about that. When we see that there's an interest in somebody else is building that, we put those into blog posts. And so we release like 2 or 3 blog posts, and SEO, it's a 6 months game. So a blog post you wrote now in 6 months will finally pick up and people will read it. And before you know it, that post is bringing you 5,000. And, the best tip I ever got in marketing was that, 80% of your success will come from 20% of your effort. So our 20% is Twitter, blog posts, and YouTube. We tried everything else, but this is where our success comes from, and this is what we double down on.
Yeah, I mean, that's great advice. And we actually kind of have a similar thing, similar approach. But I mean, I guess my takeaway for early stage companies are your founders should be DevRels. And that if you decide you want to hire a DevRel, I would hire a software engineer or transition a software engineer who's currently at your company, who is interested in the space and has shown capabilities around writing or video or talking. I think that, hiring kind of a LeBron James of DevRel for an early stage company is not a good idea. And then my final thought, which I've mentioned before, is DevRel needs structure, and they need a product that works, and they're not magical fairy dust that will automatically solve all your product market fit problems.
Amazing roundups. Final thing, where can people learn more about WonderGraph and FusionAuth?
Yeah, so WonderGraph, wondergraph.com, or my Twitter, Stefan TMD. Dan's smart. He put it in his name. I didn't, but I'll put it in the speaker notes for the podcast, and YouTube also, wondergraph.com.
Cool. Yeah. FusionAuth, the best way to find us is fusionauth.io. We do have a YouTube channel, and we're on Twitter and all those places. But fusionauth.io, and we have a set of vendor neutral articles as well as our documentation. So if you want to just learn more about the identity space in general and what identity proofing is, or the intricacies of OAuth, etc., that's all there. And we don't put the word, I've worked very hard to not put the word FusionAuth in any of those articles, because those are all supposed to be kind of, useful for anybody who wants to learn about the space.
Amazing. So there you have it. WonderGraph and FusionAuth. Stefan and Dan, thank you so much. I really enjoyed that. And thanks everyone for listening.
Thanks.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks, Dan.